Hey, welcome back to lesson 7. Now last lesson we had our first real look at JUnit. In this lesson we leave the IDE completely and we have a look at variables and do some fun stuff with that. So let's go back to our code from last lesson. Let's copy all the code out. Let's create a new class. So go to File, New, and let's create a new class. Call the class name lesson 7 and finish to save that particular class. Paste your code back into this new class, and the only thing for us to change is simply the class name, so you change it back to lesson 7. Okay, now underneath our private Webdriver and our private string declarations, we will add a few variables. Now what are variables? A variable is exactly what the word says, something that can vary. So this thing called variable can have many different types, which are defined by Java, and also must have a name which you give, and can be anything that you want. Now the type is very important, as when you come to compare variables or use them, unless they are of exactly the same type to compare or use, the console will throw up an error. Now some typical variable types that you will come in contact with are integer, essentially used for whole numbers; double, and this will take, for example, a long decimal number value; string, which would allow us to have a piece of text; boolean, which essentially works as a true or false operator, either passing the result as a true or false; and lastly char, which will hold one single character. So examples of these are declaring a integer called num with a value of 3, a double variable called long num with a value of 4567.98, a string variable called my name with a value of John in quotes, a boolean variable called sunny with a flag set to true, and last but not least, a character variable called one with a value of a in single quotes. Okay, let's go back to our code and declare some variables. Now if we wanted to check that our grand total value was indeed equal to £60, the way to check this is first for us to create or declare a variable called grand total check with a type string. So type private string grand total check, and then make sure you have a semicolon at the end to close out that particular statement. So where in our application are we checking this? If we go to the page where we have the grand total value, this grand total value is what we're going to check. So back in our code, if we assign a value to this grand total, so we've already declared grand total check. Now if we write it out, grand total check equals, and we want to use the element details to be able to store our value in there. So we say driver.find element, and then if we inspect the grand total value, we can get some ID, name or XPath hopefully. Okay, so there's no ID or name, but we can use some of the HTML via XPath. So what do we have to be able to use? We seem to have a class attribute within a span within a strong node. So if we use firepath to verify that we can actually use XPath, if we type in // and then strong, which is our first node, and then / and then use span, which is our second node, and then open a square bracket, and then say at, and then the attribute name is class and has a value of price. So if we enter the at class equals in quotes price and evaluate that, we can verify that it definitely gets picked up. Okay, great. So let's use XPath in our code. Now, for us to make sure that only the text is stored in the grand total check, we need to have .getText at the end, and this will allow us to have the text property attached. Okay, so once that's done, we have now stored the text value of the grand total element in that particular variable. Underneath our variable, let's assign another variable, again of type string, and this time called real grand total. And this time we'll assign a value to this straight away in double quotes. So we'll say equals to £299.98. So